It was Wednesday. Brian dreaded Wednesdays. Wednesdays were trash day. The day of the week his neighbor from hell, Mr. Watson, would cram everything that overflowed his trash into Brian's. The waste collectors just kept complaining, threatening to stop collecting his trash. Brian tried telling them it was the neighbor. It technically wasn't his trash. "That's between you and him," they'd say. Little did they know how afraid Brian was of Mr. Watson. Ever since he moved in a couple summers ago, it's like Mr. Watson was determined to make his life a living hell. From what the rest of the street had to say, that's just how Mr. Watson's always been ever since he had that stroke. Brian secretly hoped the next one would take him out. Scratch that. He prayed for it. If there were anyone that hated Mr. Watson more than Brian, it was Brian's Boston Terrier, Rex. Mr. Watson never referred to Rex by his name. It was that little runt, often swatting at him if he ever got too close. Brian would sometimes intentionally let Rex out when Mr. Watson was walking to his mailbox, just to watch the guy nearly break an ankle as he waddled at a speedwalker's pace back to his front door in fear of getting his butt chomped on. But these days, they're just memories for Brian, because Rex never came back one day when he let him out. It had been days since Rex went missing. The missing signs posted on every telephone pole in the block and the next didn't seem to do any good. A knock came from the front door. When Brian opened it, he saw Mr. Watson standing on his porch. The wind was so strong that he could see Mr. Watson's toupee flutter with each gust. Mr. Watson didn't notice, and it seemed like the last thing on his mind. "I've seemed to have a change of heart, Mr. Lawson. Would you care to join me for supper this afternoon? I know you've been awfully busy looking for your poor dog. Allow me to be a good neighbor." Brian was suspicious, but maybe Mr. Watson did have a sympathetic angle to him. It'd sure be nice to not hate the guy anymore, Brian thought. "What time?" A smile brooded under the emotionless face of his. "How does 5:30 sound? I've got something especially delightful for you to try. I've been wanting to make it for months, and I thought I'd share the occasion with you." "I'll be there," Ryan replied. He shut the door behind him and gasped for air. Even when Mr. Watson was being nice, it was like the air was sucked from around you, even sucked out of your lungs like a toddler with a juice box. Mr. Watson just had that way about him. 5:30 came. Brian was dreading stepping foot into Mr. Watson's. The knock was light, almost not a knock. Maybe nobody would hear it. Brian could just walk back home and say he tried but nobody answered. That wasn't the case. Mr. Watson was eager to have him over for dinner. When he opened the door, the excitement was obvious. There was nothing delightful about that smile. Under it was still the same heartless geriatric that plagued him every Wednesday. "Come on in, Mr. Lawson. The table's been set. I'll make you a plate." The house was shockingly clean. Not a speck of dust could be found on a shelf or a table, let alone all other surfaces. The kitchen shelves were decorated with floral china. Mr. Watson was a man of taste and care beyond what he had imagined. Dinner was served, and boy did it smell truly delightful, just like was promised. Creamy mashed potatoes, an assortment of roasted vegetables, bread fresh out of the oven, glazed with honey. And what's that? Some chicken? Ham? Brian couldn't tell. He asked Mr. Watson. "That's the magic I've been talking about. Give it a taste, then I'll tell you." Brian took a bite. The flavor was savory and refreshing, the bite perfectly tender, as if it was extremely fresh, not prepackaged and stored in a freezer for days before consumption. Brian's jaw dropped, eyes widened. "Mr. Watson, what is this?" Mr. Watson smiled. You can't pick your kin. You either accept that or you don't. But you definitely do pick your neighbors. Only issue is, you never know if they're putting on a facade. It's like theater, often used to hide something or manipulate you. You just don't know who someone is. I don't think anyone really knows anyone at all. They'll lie to you and make you love them. Even the most evil people are beloved, hiding their wickedness from everyone. My neighbor was one of those kinds of people. I remember playing outside in the backyard when I first caught my neighbor spying on me. We had one of those little fence holes. Typically his dog would just bark at me through the holes, and I'd poke it with a stick or see how close I could get my finger to it before it bit me. Not on this day. This day, I saw him staring at me. When I saw him, he didn't move, didn't say a word, just stared. I walked up to the fence to stare right back. When I did, I felt him staring right into my soul. It scared me, so I ran into the house and called for my dad. My dad went over to the neighbor's house and asked him about what I told him. He said it never happened. He'd been in the house the entire time. Of course, my dad believed him at first. He'd eventually believe me. It just took a lot longer than it should have. A few weeks later, I'd catch him again staring through the fence. This time, I tried poking his eye, but when I got close, he grabbed my finger and wouldn't let go. I screamed for my parents, and by the time my mom came out, my neighbor ran back into his house. I told my mom what happened, and she'd already heard about the first incident, so she told me to stop playing in the backyard. Things started going back to normal when I stopped playing in the backyard. No more creepy guys staring at me through the fence hole. Now that I'm thinking about it, I can't remember ever seeing my neighbor. Never saw him leave the house, not for work, not going to get groceries or clean the yard. I don't think I'd ever seen his face before. Only thing I ever saw was that one eye. I'd gotten off the bus one day when I saw something behind that little hinged window on his basement. It looked like a little boy, but it was hard to tell from the street. I didn't know he had kids. For all I knew, it was just him living there. I asked my parents if the neighbor had any kids, but they said they didn't think so. All they knew about him was that he was a hermit. Dad had talked to him once when they first bought the house, and that's been the only time. That's when I started getting suspicious. I went over to his house one day to look through that little window. I got on my knees and put my face as close to the vent as I could. It was really hard to see through. It was really humid that day, so I guess moisture had built up on both sides of the glass, making it super foggy. I tried wiping my side of the glass in an attempt to get a better look into the house, but it didn't help too much. All I could really see was darkness. Faint silhouettes of walls and corners of walls was all I could make out. I thought I saw a chair, but maybe it was a bed? Wasn't sure. Could be anything, really. What an odd place to put a chair or a bed, I thought. I put my ear up to the glass and listened. There was a whirring on the other side, maybe a generator. Then I heard something dragging. I quickly peered back through the glass, and there he was, another boy. He was trying to tell me something. I put my ear back on the glass to listen again. That's when I heard him. "Leave, or he'll get you, too." I was about 9 when all of this happened, so don't get frustrated if I forget some details here and there. I'll do my best to remember what I can. I've blocked out so much of it. It was my childhood home. My parents don't own the place anymore. Instead, they've moved down to Florida for the weather. I'm still up here in Maine, serving to make a living. But none of that matters. See, I'm already going on tangents. Like I said, it was my childhood home. I was about 9 when we got a new neighbor. I was really sad to see the last family move. I made friends with their kids and we'd play every day after school. The new neighbor was not a fair trade in the slightest. We got a knock on the door. It was the new guy. My mother answered the door. I had a habit of following her around all the time when I was little, so I was with her. The neighbor seemed really nice. He asked my mother if the man of the house was home. Mom yelled for Dad, and here we all were, wondering what the new guy was going to say. I didn't really understand what it meant then, but now I do. He told my parents he was a sex offender and was required by law to let everyone on the block know about it. My dad told me to go into the kitchen, so I don't know what else was said. I just remember my parents being worried about me playing outside without them after that, because they were worried he might have been a pedophile. I got a little rebellious one day and opened up the back patio sliding door so I could go play in the backyard. We didn't have a fence or anything separating the property, so I pretty much had a full view of the entire block's backyards from end to end. As I was running around, I heard someone say hello. It was the new guy. I was always told not to talk to strangers, so I didn't say anything back. But he persisted. He didn't ask me anything weird, and he really was being nice. He asked me my name, and I caved in. If he was going to be my neighbor, why shouldn't I trust him? My dad must have seen I was in the backyard talking to someone, because he rushed out and picked me up and yelled at me. I wasn't allowed out of my parents' sight after that. I was around 11, maybe 10, I'm not sure. But around that time was when I started riding the bus. My parents had given me a key to the house and instructed me to go straight in when I got off the bus. My bus didn't drop me off directly in front of my house, but dropped several of us off at the end of the street. The walk wasn't far, maybe 5 minutes tops. One day after getting off the bus, a car pulled up beside me and someone in it rolled down their window. It was my neighbor. He asked if I wanted a ride, said I'd be in and out within 15 seconds. I thought about it for a second, and then I said, sure. It wasn't 15 seconds. We passed my house and his, then the entire neighborhood. I asked him where we were going. He asked me if I wanted some ice cream. I said okay, but that he had to bring me back before my parents got home, or they'd be really upset with me getting in a car with a stranger. Then he smiled and said, "Honey, I'm not a stranger. I'm your neighbor." It's hard for me to recall the rest. I'd rather not, so I'll keep it vague and short, for my sake and probably yours too if this is a sensitive topic for you. He never brought me back home. That was never his intention. My parents called the police when they found I was missing. We keep Life 360 on our phones, so they were able to track me down. He's in prison now.